He didn't knock. He didn't call. He just showed up. The car was still warm when Carlos stepped out, dust rising slowly beneath his shoes as he walked toward the house. It was smaller than he expected, older, the kind of place that looked like it had been holding its breath for years. And then he saw them. Marta was kneeling near the door, holding the kids close, too close. Not the kind of hug you give after a long day, the kind you give when something's about to be taken from you. Carlos slowed down. Something wasn't right. He could feel it before he understood it. Then he saw him, standing just a few steps away, calm, still, watching, like he had already been there for a while, like he belonged. Carlos stopped. The distance between them wasn't large, but it felt heavy, loaded. "Who are you?" The man didn't answer immediately. He looked at Carlos, then at Marta, then at the kids, and then back at Carlos, like he was measuring something. "You took your time." Carlos frowned. "Excuse me?" The man stepped forward, not aggressive, not rushed, just enough to make his presence unavoidable. "You should have come sooner." Marta shifted slightly, tightening her arms around the children. Carlos noticed. That was enough. What's going on? This time he wasn't asking the man. He was asking her. But she didn't answer. She couldn't. Her eyes were fixed on the ground. The man smiled, not friendly, not even mocking, just certain. "You already know something's wrong." Carlos looked at him again, now sharper. "Say what you have to say." The man tilted his head slightly. "Straight to the point." A small pause. Then, "Good." He took another step. "Now close enough. Too close. Because I don't like repeating myself." Carlos didn't move, didn't blink. "Then don't." Silence. The kind that stretches just enough to make everything louder. The wind, the gravel, the breath behind you. The man exhaled slowly, and then said it, just like that. "Take a good look." He gestured toward the kids, toward Marta, toward the house. "Because this—" A small pause. "Won't stay like this." Carlos felt something shift. Not outside, inside. "What are you talking about?" The man's eyes didn't move. "You'll understand." Carlos stepped forward. Now they were face to face. "No. Poser. You'll explain." The man didn't react, didn't flinch, didn't step back. "You think you came here to fix something?" Carlos held his gaze. "Didn't I?" The man let out a short breath, almost a laugh. "No." Another pause. Then, "You came here because something is about to be taken." Carlos's jaw tightened. "What?" The man didn't answer immediately. He turned slightly, looked at Marta, at the kids, and then back. "You're already late." Carlos felt it now, clear, heavy, real. "Late for what?" The man finally smiled, slow, controlled. "For deciding." Carlos didn't understand. Not fully, but he understood enough. Enough to know. This wasn't random. This wasn't new. This had been happening, and whatever it wasn't over. "Say it." The man looked straight at him. No hesitation, no build-up, no warning. "Take one more step." A pause, just long enough. And then, "I'll take them." Silence. Absolute. Marta closed her eyes. The kids didn't move. Carlos didn't breathe. Because now, it wasn't a feeling anymore. It wasn't suspicion. It wasn't tension. It was real. And it had just begun. No one moved. Not at first. The words were still hanging there. Heavy, uncomfortable, real. Carlos felt it settle in his chest, like something locking into place. "What did you just say?" His voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. The man didn't rush, didn't repeat himself. "You heard me." Carlos took a step forward, slow, controlled. "You don't get to say something like that and just stand there." The man watched him, calm, almost bored. "And you don't get to walk in here and pretend you understand what's happening." That hit differently. Carlos stopped, just for a second. "Then explain it." The man shook his head slightly. You're still trying to catch up. Carlos's jaw tightened. Try me. Silence. Short. Sharp. The man shifted his weight, looked past Carlos for a moment, at the car, then back again. How long has it been? Carlos frowned. What? Since you've been here? Carlos didn't answer. Since you've actually looked at this place. A pause. At them. Marta didn't react, but her grip tightened again. Carlos noticed. That's not your concern. The man tilted his head. Everything here is my concern. Carlos stepped closer. No. Pausa. It isn't. The man didn't move, but something in his expression changed, slightly. You still think this is about you? Carlos held his ground. Then make it clear. The man exhaled slowly, like he was deciding how much to say. This doesn't start today. Carlos's eyes narrowed. Then when? No answer. How long? Still nothing. Carlos looked at Marta. How long has he been coming here? She didn't answer. Didn't even look up. That silence said more than anything else. Carlos turned back. Now sharper. How long? The man spoke before she could. Long enough. Carlos's chest tightened. Long enough for what? The man took a small step to the side, not away, just enough to shift the angle. For things to get complicated. Carlos let out a breath. Say it clearly. The man looked at him. Direct. This situation already exists. A pause. You just walked into it. That landed. Because it wasn't a threat. Not yet. It was worse. It was established. Carlos processed it. Fast. So you've been coming here. No response. Talking to her. Still nothing. Saying things like that. Now the man smiled. Just a little. Eventually. Carlos's eyes hardened. And she didn't stop you. That one was directed at Marta. She flinched, barely, but it was enough. Carlos saw it, and something inside him shifted again. Why? Marta shook her head. Not a denial. More like exhaustion. Because it doesn't stop. Her voice was low, almost breaking. Carlos turned slowly. What doesn't stop? She didn't answer right away. The man did. Me. Silence. Carlos looked back at him. You think that's something to say out loud? The man shrugged slightly. It's something you should understand. Carlos stepped forward again, now closer than before. No. Pausa. It's something you're going to explain. The man leaned slightly toward him. You're not in control here. Carlos didn't move. That's where you're wrong. The man's eyes narrowed. You just got here. Carlos's voice dropped. And I'm already asking the right questions. Silence. The wind moved through the trees, light, but noticeable. You don't ask questions in this situation, the man said. Carlos tilted his head slightly. Then what do I do? The man looked at him, straight. You respond. Carlos held his gaze. To what? The man didn't hesitate this time. To the problem. Carlos didn't blink. Which is? A small pause. Then, that you're late. Carlos felt it again. That same phrase. But now it meant more. Late for what? The man's expression didn't change. For, deciding how this ends. Silence. Marta closed her eyes again. The kids stayed still, and Carlos finally understood something. Not everything, but enough to know. This wasn't a moment, this was a system, and he had just stepped inside it. The silence didn't break. It thickened. Carlos could feel it pressing in, like the space itself had started to close around them. He didn't look away. You said I'm late. A pause. So say it clearly. The man adjusted his stance, relaxed. Too relaxed. You're late because this isn't the first time. Carlos's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. How many? The man didn't answer. How many times have you been here? Still nothing. Carlos took a step forward. Answer me. The man finally looked at him. Enough. Carlos let out a slow breath. That's not an answer. It is. A pause. Just not the one you want. Carlos's jaw tightened. What do you want? The man tilted his head slightly. That's the wrong question. Carlos didn't move. Then fix it. The man smiled faintly. What I expect. Silence. Carlos waited. And what exactly is that? The man didn't hesitate this time. 10,000. The number landed flat, clean. No emotion, no explanation. Carlos didn't react immediately. 10,000 what? The man's eyes didn't move. Don't play that game. Carlos stepped closer. I'm not playing anything. A beat. You said a number. Finish it. The man exhaled through his nose. 10,000. A pause. And this stops. Carlos stared at him. This what? The man gestured slightly. The house. Marta. The kids. This. Carlos followed the gesture, then looked back. That's not specific. The man's expression sharpened just a little. It doesn't need to be. Carlos shook his head slowly. It does. A pause. Because right now it sounds like you're selling something that doesn't end. That landed. The man didn't smile this time. Everything ends. Carlos held his gaze. No. A beat. Everything repeats. Silence. The man's eyes narrowed. Slightly. You're catching on. Carlos didn't react to that. So this already happened. Not a question. A statement. The man didn't confirm it, but he didn't deny it either. Carlos looked at Marta. How many times? She didn't answer, but her shoulders dropped. Just a little, that was enough. Carlos turned back. You've been doing this. The man shrugged. People make decisions. Carlos's voice hardened. Under pressure. The man tilted his head. That's still a decision. Carlos took another step. Now they were close again. Too close. And if they don't? The man didn't hesitate. Then things get complicated. Carlos's eyes locked on his. Define complicated. The man leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. Things stop working. Carlos didn't blink. What things? The man's gaze shifted briefly. Toward the kids, then back. The things that matter. That was enough. Carlos felt something tighten in his chest. Not fear, not exactly. Something colder, more precise. You don't get to look at them. When you say that, the man didn't step back. I just did. Silence. Carlos didn't move. So this is it. A pause. You show up. You say a number, and you expect everything to fall in place. The man shrugged again. It usually does. Carlos let that sit. And if it doesn't? The man's expression stayed flat. Then we find out how far you're willing to go. That wasn't a threat. It was worse. It was a process. Carlos saw it clearly now. Not a moment, not a mistake, a structure. You've done this before. The man didn't answer. Many times, still nothing. Carlos nodded slowly. Yeah. A pause. You have. The man watched him, carefully now, evaluating. Carlos took a step back, not retreating, thinking, looking at the whole scene, the house, Marta, the kids, then back at him. 10,000. He repeated it quietly, not as a question, as a realization. And that makes everything go away. The man spoke immediately. It keeps things in place. Carlos shook his head. No, a beat. It keeps you coming back. Silence. That one hit. The man's expression shifted. Barely, but enough. Carlos saw it and understood something new. This doesn't end with money. The man straightened slightly. That depends on you. Carlos looked at him, steady. No, a pause. It depends on whether someone decides it ends. The air changed again. Subtle, but real. Because for the first time, the pattern wasn't just being followed, It was being questioned, and that was where things started to break. The air didn't move, but something shifted, not in the space, in the tone, because the man wasn't explaining anymore. He wasn't negotiating. Now, he was enjoying it. You know what the interesting part is? Carlos didn't answer. He wasn't going to give him that. The man looked around slowly, taking his time, like everything there belonged to him. The house, the ground, the silence. It's always the same. Carlos kept his eyes on him, still, focused. They always think they can handle it. The man's gaze drifted toward the house, the worn wood, the uneven door, the cracks no one had fixed. Like this is enough. That landed, not loudly, but deep. Carlos felt it, but he didn't react, not yet. Look at it. The man gestured openly now. No hesitation. Really look at it. Carlos didn't turn. He already had. Do you actually think this works? That question wasn't meant to be answered. It was meant to cut. Marta shifted slightly. Barely, but enough. Carlos saw it. Lower your hand. The man didn't. If anything, he extended it further. Why? A faint smile. It's already saying everything for me. Marta closed her eyes, slower this time, like she knew what was coming. That's enough. Her voice was quiet, not weak, worn. The man turned toward her. Is it? A step closer. Or does it just feel like enough because you're used to it? Carlos moved instantly. One step forward. Don't talk to her like that. The man turned his head back toward him, unbothered. Like what? Carlos's voice dropped. Like you know, anything. The man let out a small breath, almost amused. Don't I? A pause, then, why are you here? That one hit. Because it wasn't random, it wasn't abstract, it was direct. Carlos didn't answer. The man stepped closer again. You didn't just show up. Another step. You came because something wasn't right. He gestured again, more precise this time. And now you're looking at it. Carlos felt it. That attempt to plant doubt, to shift ground. You don't get to define this. The man tilted his ahead. Then define it. A pause. Go ahead. Carlos didn't speak because the trap was clear. The man continued. They live here. A glance toward the kids. They grow up here. Another glance. With this. That word hung there, empty, but loaded. Carlos took a step forward, now inches away. Careful. The man didn't move. Why? Carlos's eyes didn't leave his. Because you're starting to confuse control with truth. Silence. The man watched him, then a small smile. They're not the same? Carlos didn't blink. Not even close. The man leaned in slightly. Then explain something to me. Carlos held his ground. Try. The man's voice dropped. If everything here is fine. A pause. Why are you here? That one dug deeper, because it wasn't just an attack. It was a mirror. Carlos felt it, but didn't let it settle. That's not your angle. The man straightened. Everything here is my angle. Carlos shook his head slowly. No. A pause. You just inserted yourself into it. The man's expression hardened. Just a little. That's not how this works. Carlos's voice stayed calm. That's exactly how it works. Silence. Tighter now. Sharper. You come in, Carlos continued. You push. You repeat. Until someone gives in. The man didn't interrupt. And then you come back. Another step closer. Because it worked. A beat. Not because it was right. That one landed clean. The man's smile faded. Not completely, but enough. Everyone says that. Carlos didn't react. At first. A pause. And then they understand. Carlos shook his head. No. Another pause. They get tired. Silence. The wind moved again. Stronger this time. Marta didn't move. The kids stayed close, and the man watched, carefully now, because something had changed. Not outside. Inside Carlos. Because this wasn't just pressure anymore, it wasn't just money. It wasn't just control. It was something else, something sharper, more personal, more dangerous. Because now, the humiliation wasn't working. The silence didn't collapse. It settled. Different now, not heavy, defined. Carlos wasn't reacting anymore. He wasn't pushing back. He wasn't trying to win the exchange. He was seeing it clearly. For the first time since he arrived, he stopped looking at the moment and started looking at the pattern. 10,000. He said it again. Quiet. Not as a question, as a marker. The man didn't answer. He just watched, waiting. Because this was the moment. The one he had seen before, over and over again. The moment where everything tilted, where resistance softened, where people adjusted. Carlos looked past him, at the house, at the door, at the ground that hadn't changed, at the space where everything had been happening, before he even got there, and then he shook his head, slow, barely visible. That's not enough. The man smiled. There it was, familiar, predictable. It never is. Carlos didn't respond to that, because now he wasn't listening to the words, he was mapping the structure. It's not about the number. A pause. It's about the loop. Silence. The man's expression didn't change, but something behind it shifted. Carlos stepped back, not retreating, adjusting perspective. You don't stop, he said it calmly. You reset. A beat. And you come back. The man tilted his head slightly. That depends. Carlos shook his head. No. A pause. It doesn't. He turned briefly toward Marta. Just a second, but enough. Because in that glance, everything was confirmed. How many times? He asked again. This time, not expecting an answer. And he didn't get one. He didn't need it. Carlos closed his eyes for a moment, just long enough, and when he opened them, something was different, completely. Today it's 10,000. A pause. Next time it's something else. He looked at the man. Direct. And after that, another pause. You raise it again. Silence. The man didn't interrupt. Because it works, Carlos continued. Not because it ends. That landed harder than anything before. Because it wasn't resistance. It was recognition. The man straightened slightly. You're overthinking it. Carlos shook his head. No, a beat. I was underthinking it. Silence. And now, the dynamic shifted, subtly but completely. If I pay, Carlos continued, this doesn't stop. A pause. It starts. The man didn't smile. Not this time. You're making a mistake. Carlos looked at him. Steady. No. Another pause. I was making one before. The wind moved again, but it didn't interrupt anything, because the moment had already changed. You don't fix this with money, Carlos said. You extend it. Silence. The man watched him carefully now, not casually, not comfortably. Then what do you think you're going to do? Carlos didn't hesitate. End it. The words stayed in the air, clear, simple, irreversible. The man's expression tightened, just a fraction. That's not how this works. Carlos stepped forward, calm, controlled. That's how it starts working. Silence. And in that silence, something broke, not outside, not visibly, but in the structure, because for the first time, the pattern wasn't being followed, it was being rejected. And once that happens, there's no going back. No one spoke. But everything had already shifted. Carlos didn't move, didn't rush, didn't try to push the moment forward, because he didn't need to. The decision was already made, and that kind of decision doesn't need noise. The man was still watching him, closely now, no longer relaxed, no longer certain. Say it. His voice was lower this time, less controlled, Not by much, but enough. Carlos didn't answer right away. He looked past him again at the house, at the door that didn't quite close, at the ground that held every step that had led to this. Then he turned, back to him. No. That was it. No explanation, no build-up, just no. The air shifted instantly, sharper, colder. That's not an answer. Carlos held his gaze. It is. Silence. The man took a step forward, more direct now. You don't understand the consequences. Carlos didn't move. Yes. A pause. I do. The man studied him. Then you know what happens next. Carlos nodded slightly. Yeah. A beat. I stop it. That didn't land the way the man expected. He frowned. You don't get to stop anything. Carlos took a step forward, matching his distance. I already did. Silence. The tension wasn't rising. It was condensing, becoming more precise, more focused. You just got here, the man said. Carlos didn't react. And I already see it. A pause. That's enough. The man's jaw tightened. You're stepping into something you can't control. Carlos tilted his head slightly. That's already happened. A beat. Now I'm correcting it. Silence. The wind moved again, but no one looked away. Last chance, the man said. Flat. Controlled. Carlos shook his head. No. A pause. Last time. That changed it, because it wasn't defiance. It was closure. A final. And that kind of tone doesn't invite negotiation. The man stared at him. Longer now, trying to find something. A hesitation. Doubt. Anything, but there wasn't anything there. Carlos wasn't reacting anymore. He wasn't weighing options. He wasn't adjusting. He had already crossed that line. You're making this worse, the man said. Carlos didn't blink. No. A beat. I'm finishing it. Silence. The kind that doesn't need to be filled because the answer is already there. The man took another step, closer, trying to re-establish pressure. You don't know who you're dealing with. Carlos stepped forward too. No hesitation. Doesn't matter, a pause. I know enough. They stood there, close, too close, but now it was different. Before it was control. Now it was resistance. And resistance is harder to predict. This doesn't end here, the man said. Not as strong as before. Carlos nodded. No. A pause. It starts here. Silence. And in that silence, the outcome wasn't decided yet, but the direction was, and that was enough. The space between them didn't exist anymore. It had collapsed, not physically, but in everything that mattered. The distance was gone. So was the hesitation. The man didn't move, but his presence changed, less fluid, more rigid. You're wrong. He said it flat, no smile, no tone, just pressure. Carlos didn't respond. He didn't need to, because this wasn't about words anymore, it was about position. You don't understand how this works, the man continued. Carlos looked at him. That's exactly why I'm changing it. Silence. The man stepped forward. No subtlety now. You don't change anything. Carlos didn't move. It already changed. A pause. You just haven't adjusted yet. That hit. Not loudly, but precisely. The man's eyes narrowed. You don't get to walk in and rewrite this. Carlos shook his head. No. A beat. I just stopped following it. Silence. Tighter now. Sharper. That's not how this ends, the man said. Carlos held his gaze. That's exactly how it ends. The man stepped closer again, now fully inside his space, trying to reclaim it. You think you're the first one? To say that? Carlos didn't react. No. A pause. I'm the first one who means it. Silence. The wind moved through them again, but neither of them broke eye contact. You're putting them at risk, the man said. Carlos's expression didn't change. You already did that. A pause. By coming here. That shifted something. Slight, but real. You think you're protecting them? The man pushed. Carlos didn't blink. I know I am. Silence. The man's jaw tightened. You're making this harder than it needs to. Carlos tilted his head slightly. For you, a beat. Not for me, that one landed, because it flipped the frame. The man didn't respond immediately, and that hesitation, even that small, was enough. Carlos saw it. This only works if people cooperate, he continued. If they hesitate, if they doubt, if they try to minimize it. A pause. If they play along. The man's eyes stayed on him, but something underneath had shifted. And now, he asked. Carlos didn't hesitate. Now you don't have that. Silence. The structure was cracking, not visibly, but internally. You're not in control anymore, Carlos said. Calm, measured, final. The man exhaled slowly, trying to reset, trying to regain ground. This isn't over. Carlos nodded. No, a pause. But it's not yours anymore. Silence. And that was the moment, because control isn't lost in a single move. It slips, piece by piece, until suddenly, it's gone. The man took a step back, just one, small, but undeniable. Carlos didn't react, didn't push, didn't follow, because he didn't need to. The shift had already happened, and they both knew it. This doesn't end here, the man said again, but now. It sounded different, less like a threat, more like resistance. Carlos looked at him, steady. It already did. A pause. For you. Silence. And for the first time, there was nothing left to negotiate. The silence stayed, but it wasn't the same. Before, it pressed. Now, it opened. The man was the first to move, just a step, small. But it broke. Something, not the tension, the position. Carlos saw it, didn't react, didn't need to, because that step said everything. This isn't going to play out the way you think. The man's voice was still controlled, but not stable. Carlos didn't answer. He just watched. The man looked around, at the house, at the ground, at the space that had shifted without him noticing, like he was trying to locate something he had lost. They all say the same thing, he added, but it didn't land the same. Not anymore. Carlos stepped forward, not aggressively, just enough to take back the space. Not me. The man held his gaze, longer this time, trying to re-anchor himself. We'll see. Carlos shook his head slightly. No. A pause. You won't. Silence. The wind moved again. Soft, but present. The man glanced toward Marta, then toward the kids, and for the first time, he didn't use it, didn't gesture, didn't lean into it, because he couldn't. Not the same way. Carlos noticed, and that confirmed it. It's over, he said, not loud, not forceful, just clear. The man's jaw tightened. This comes back. Carlos nodded. Maybe. A beat. But not like this. Silence. And that was the difference. Before, everything belonged to the man, the timing, the pressure, the outcome. Now, it didn't. You don't get to decide that, the man said. But it lacked weight. Carlos didn't react. That's already decided. A pause. You just didn't expect it. The man stood still, but the tension wasn't holding the same shape. It was breaking, fragmenting, losing form. He took another step back, clearer this time, more visible, and then he turned slightly, not fully, just enough to indicate something. Distance, withdrawal. This doesn't end here, he repeated. But now, it wasn't a threat, it was a refusal. Carlos didn't answer, because the conflict wasn't there anymore. Not in the same way. It had shifted, and once it shifts, it doesn't go back. The man stood there for another second, two, then turned and walked. Not fast, not rushed, but without control, without direction. And that was the difference. Carlos didn't follow, didn't speak, didn't stop him. because there was nothing left to prove. The outcome had already changed, and that was enough. The silence came back, but it didn't weigh anymore. It stayed, light, open, like the space had finally exhaled. The man was gone. Not completely, not really. His presence still lingered, in the words, in the tension, in what had almost happened. But he wasn't there anymore, not in front of them, and that changed everything. Carlos didn't move right away. He stayed where he was, looking at the space where it all unfolded, as if confirming it, that it was real, that it had actually shifted, that it wasn't going to snap back. Then he exhaled, slow, deep, and turned. Marta was still there, in the same place, but not the same. Her posture had changed, slightly, but enough. She wasn't closed in anymore. She wasn't bracing. She was present. Carlos took a step toward her. No urgency, no pressure. "It's done." He said it simply, not as a promise, not as reassurance, as a fact. Marta looked at him. For a moment, she didn't respond, like she needed to process what that meant, or if she could even believe it. "Is it?" Her voice was careful, not hopeful. "Not yet." Carlos nodded. "Yes." A pause. Not because he left. He glanced briefly toward the road, then back. Because he doesn't control it anymore. Silence. But this time, it wasn't heavy. One of the kids shifted, just slightly, but it was the first real movement since everything started. Carlos noticed, and something settled inside him. Not relief, certainty. "This won't be easy," he said. Marta nodded. "No." A pause. "It won't." But there was something else in her voice now, not fear, not resignation, something smaller, but stronger, willingness. Carlos looked around once more. The house, the ground, the same place, unchanged, and yet completely different, because the problem was still there, the structure, the history, everything that had led to this, but it wasn't leading anymore. Carlos stepped back slightly, just enough to take it in, and then looked at her again. "We'll fix it. Not a big promise. Not a solution. A direction." Marta didn't answer, but she didn't look away either. And that was enough. Because this time, she didn't lower her eyes. And that was where it started. The wind passed again, but it didn't lift anything. It didn't disturb anything. It just moved through and left.